Good morning, everybody. Anyways, it is a delight to be here, and I really deeply appreciate the chance to say a few words and to set the tone for what I know has been a productive conference so far. I did want to riff a little bit on kind of the introductory remarks about kind of the power of the ocean, right? Kind of that humbling feel that provides to you. And for me, you know, my family, they were always beach people, and so we would go and spend a week at Ocean City. My grandfather loved the ocean very much, and he was a big, strong, powerful guy. And so in my 5-year-old mind, there was no one more powerful than my grandfather, until we would see him out in the ocean battling those waves and watching him every once in a while get clobbered by one and going down hard. And I thought, wow, something more powerful than my grandfather, and that is the ocean. But I will also tell you what, stepping back with Artemis II and seeing our beautiful planet from outer space, and just noting the beauty, but also how fragile it is. And so it is something that deserves our respect, it deserves our love, it deserves our attention. And I want to thank you for being the people who do that day in and day out. For those of you who are not as familiar with the Secretariat of Natural and Historic Resources, we essentially implement Article 11 of Virginia's state constitution. And so as a Virginian, I'm very proud of the fact that our constitution actually has an affirmative right to clean air, to clean water, to healthy landscapes, to hunt, to fish, collect game. And so that's our mission. That is our guiding star within the Secretariat of Natural and Historic Resources. And to do that, we have 5 just tremendous agencies. So we've got our Department of Environmental Quality, which is well represented here. So they do our permitting, but they also do coastal zone management, as well as our Chesapeake Bay program. We've got Conservation and Recreation, so they do our state parks, but they also do important things like dam safety and floodplain management. We've got the Department of Wildlife Resources. Those are the hunting and fishing. We've got the Marine Resources Commission, so they are the stewards of our coastal areas and make sure that we have an abundance of great things to eat and the habitat for them to be in. And then we have the Department of Historic Resources, and they are also the stewards of our history, making sure we're preserving the important things that make Virginia what it is, and then ensuring that current generations and future generations are able to connect with that history so that it is meaningful. The other part, and this is kind of the cool thing about being in the General Assembly for 20 years, is you actually get to see the fruition of things that you introduced. And one of the funny, ironic things is that the last piece of our Secretariat is the Virginia Office of Resilience. And it's a bill that I actually introduced, and little did I think when I introduced that bill that I would ultimately be managing that office within my secretariat. But it's a really, really cool group. So it is a small but mighty group of 3 people whose sole mission is to break down silos and work across not just agencies, but also secretariats to ensure that we are doing the hard work of planning for climate change and making sure that we're as resilient as possible. Almost impossible for a group of 3 people to try to achieve that, but they do a really, really great job of pulling people ultimately together. Before I begin, I wanted to make it a little bit personal in terms of my connections here today, and so I appreciate the introduction and some of my work. I do come from a regional planning background, and so my first job was with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission as an environmental planner, and so I very deeply appreciate, number one, the role of local governments, but also the role of regional planning. And also understanding that that can take a lot of different forms. And so that can be program coordination, it can be strategic coordination, it could be planning coordination, but it could also just simply be sitting at the table and working through tough issues, complex issues, solving problems. And so I come from the perspective of really believing in the power of that regional collaboration and coordination. The other thing, though, is at the Regional Commission, I wasn't just an environmental planner, I was also the coastal program coordinator. And so this is really, really cool to be able to see people in the audience who I've known for 30 years or so. 35, okay, I was 35. And so that, of course, was funded by the Coastal Zone Management Program out of DEQ. Now, mind you, I am from Northern Virginia, and so our coastline is the upper tidal Potomac. And so needless to say, I used every excuse possible to get out of Dodge and out of that traffic and to other areas of the coastal areas for our quarterly coastal program management meetings. And so through that, though, I really did develop a deep appreciation for our coastal communities and a lot of the concerns that they ultimately bring to the table. And so that's a perspective that I have kept with me in my professional career, and it's something that I take with me in my new role with the Secretariat. All of that ultimately led, as was mentioned, to a professional career in stormwater management, in Chesapeake Bay restoration. One of the beautiful things about the Virginia General Assembly is that it is part-time, and so almost all of us hold jobs outside of outside our legislators. And I know that that is not unique to Virginia. I think most of the Marco states are very similar in that regard, but it provides kind of a really beautiful richness to the debate and the discussions that each of us comes with our own individual professional perspective that we could go ahead and weigh in on. And so mine was municipal stormwater management and stormwater finance. And I know this is going to be hard to believe, but I pretty much had that space all to myself in the General Assembly. All I had to do was rattle off a couple of acronyms, so NPDES, TMDL. People's eyes would glaze over. They're like, pass the bill, whatever you want, David, just stop talking. But it's really, really important work. It does change your perspective, though, right? And so I imagine that most of you in this room are the same way. When people are looking for the rainbows, when people are enjoying the pitter-patter of storms during the summer here in Virginia, I, like many of you, are looking at that stormwater and thinking, oh man, what's that sheen? What's it being carried in terms of plastics and trash and nitrogen and fertilizers and all those things? How's that going to affect our local streams? How's that going to affect our rivers? How's that going to affect the Chesapeake Bay? How's that going to affect our oceans, right? So it frankly does take the joy out of those summer rainstorms, but it's worth it, right? It's really important that we think about those things and the connections from the land ultimately to the water. So really pleased today to bring greetings from our 75th governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. And so one of the reasons that I really was excited about working for Governor Spanberger is that she does really understand the importance of natural resources management, and especially in the context of coastal and ocean-related issues. And so a little fun story is that when I went in to interview for the position, and she turned around and said, David, would love for you to be able to join as my secretary, and immediately pivoted to asking me questions about a little fish that is managed by another regional organization. Anybody want to guess what fish that is? Menhaden, exactly. So anyways, she gets it. She loves big policy, but she's also not afraid to get into the weeds. And menhaden is one of those things where she understood she would need to understand and get into the weeds. So my first job here today is mostly to welcome our guests from out of state and our participants from the federal government to this very, very special place that we Virginians call home, and to provide you a little bit of context for what it is that we are ultimately trying to protect here in Virginia. And so, of course, we can start right here in Virginia Beach, which has more than 30 miles of beaches along the ocean and along the Chesapeake Bay, boardwalks, hotels, families. It's a very, very busy place. And in fact, I think the last statistic that I saw was that there are about 14.3 million people that visited this place in 2024. To the south, False Cape State Park offers something completely different, and is one of the last remaining undeveloped areas of the Atlantic coast and is accessible, and I've tried this out, and this is indeed true, by foot or by boat. My notes also said bicycle. I'm not quite sure how the heck you pull that off, unless you got a very special bicycle, but it is a really, really amazing place sandwiched in between the Atlantic Ocean and the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge. To the north, we have one of my very, very favorite state parks, so First Landing State Park, where those who eventually settled in Jamestown first landed in 1607. If you go a little bit further north than that, you have Fort Monroe. It's a place of great sorrow, but it's also a place of great hope, and it's a place of great triumph. So if you're not familiar with Fort Monroe is the arrival point for the first enslaved Africans to English North America. But it's also the place where those enslaved sought their freedom and education during the Civil War. I also want to recognize the indigenous people who called this place home for thousands and thousands of years. Our Virginia tribes still have much to teach us about conservation and respect for their lands, and they are extremely valued partners in conservation today. So to say this area has a powerful sense of place would be an understatement. But it is why we're all together, right? It's that powerful sense of place. And I know each of the states has that same powerful sense of place that makes you want to work hard day in and day out in order to be able to protect those resources. I also wanted to mention that this area is a part of our economic engine. It's a huge part of our economic engine. And that's always the really cool thing about this job is that it's about protecting our natural resources, but it's also about the economy. And so something that I believe in, our governor believes in, is it's not an either or, it's an and. And so they are mutually beneficial to one another. You can't have a strong economy without having a clean environment, and you can't have a clean environment if you don't have a strong economy to be able to support that. And so I'm a true believer in making sure that we're able to do both of those things. Tourism here in Virginia Beach, worth $2.6 billion each year. Virginia seafood industry is worth $1.3 billion in total output. That was 2023. If you have traveled around here and enjoyed our traffic, you'll notice the other area where there's traffic is out on the Chesapeake Bay, where you will see a number of container ships queued up in order to be able to use one of our fantastic ports. This year, we just finished dredging of the main navigational channel to 55 feet, and so that makes it the deepest channel on the East Coast, which is pretty cool. Of course, we're also very proud of our military presence here, including Naval Station Norfolk. It is the largest naval station in the world and home to the Atlantic Fleet. What I am particularly proud of is that they are also equal partners in all of this. And so my role as secretary and in my role as delegate, I sit on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. One of our actual most active members of the Chesapeake Bay Commission is the commander of Navy Region Mid-Atlantic, which I think is really, really cool that they care enough to actually come to those meetings, and they reach out and give us tours of their facilities to show us what they are doing in order to be able to protect water resources. Just across the James is Newport News Shipyard, which is one of the coolest places to visit ever. It's a really neat place. It's where they overhaul and service the fleets. It's also the only shipyard in the country that is capable of building nuclear-powered aircraft carriers for the Navy, and that's really neat. Finally, our coast is now providing homes and our businesses with clean electricity. And so we're very proud that as of this March, the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Farm started producing electricity. And by the end of the year, Dominion Power anticipates it will have all 176 wind turbines, and those will ultimately be able to produce 2.6 gigawatts worth of power. And that's pretty amazing to have that kind of clean energy. So needless to say, we have a very, very busy ocean off of our coast, and it takes an incredible amount of coordination and planning between our federal and state partners as well as our industry partners to keep things running smoothly. So I did want to hit on just a couple areas specific to Virginia in terms about the administration's priorities that overlap with your mission. The first one is the importance of connecting people to their environment. And this is something I lead almost every presentation with because it's so critical that people understand, appreciate, connect, are able to touch and feel and be part of their outdoors, because it's that allows them to value it and to make sure that we're investing in its protection. Also, from a stormwater management standpoint, I realize that the pollution that we see in our bay, the pollution that we see in our oceans is often the results of millions of small decisions by people. And so that's how we ultimately solve those problems, is by helping to educate people to make the right decisions ultimately. And so it's an area, and in fact, I'll be out this afternoon back up in Richmond at one of our Chesapeake education forums, where we'll be talking about the importance of environmental literacy and creating environmental stewards within K through 12 education that has benefits that last for a lifetime. The second one is preventing pollution in the first place. And this is one that I so strongly believe in. It's something that we are working to be able to kind of flip the narrative in terms of how the state looks at environmental problems. Rather than always reacting and responding, making sure that we are making the investments up front to keep the pollution from happening in the first place. One only needs to look at the Potomac Interceptor issue, if people are familiar with that, up in DC, that released about 350 million gallons of raw sewage into the Potomac River, which had huge consequences with respect to not just our water quality, but also for our economy. And so it's really important, it's a powerful reminder that it is far less expensive to invest in preventing the pollution in the first place than having to react and respond. Third, getting ahead of emerging issues. And so this is something our jobs would be, I would have been out of the job a long time ago, many of you would be too, if we didn't have to deal with new challenges. But that, unfortunately, is not the real world. And so two really important things, that we focused on here in Virginia are microplastics and PFAS. And I'm particularly proud that this year Virginia took some very major steps on PFAS, particularly when it comes to monitoring. So ensuring that we are monitoring what's coming out of our industrial discharges, and monitoring what's coming out of our wastewater discharges, so that we can actually control the sources before they get into the water. But also making sure that we address PFAS with respect to land application of biosolids. And so this is something particularly proud of because it wasn't just a Virginia initiative. We actually coordinated with Maryland in order to be able to have very similar legislation on both sides. And it was a little bit of mutually assured destruction, quite frankly, which is that we were terrified that Maryland would pass something and we wouldn't. And then we would wind up being the dumping ground for biosolids with PFAS, and Maryland was terrified at the same time that we would do the same thing. All worked out in the end. One of the big disrupting issues, of course, and it's not an emerging issue anymore, but kind of reality that's staring us in the face, is climate change. And so I know that you all are very keenly aware of this. It's something that I really appreciated is in your priorities with respect to things that you want to deal with. Here in Virginia, as many of you know, we are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of sea level rise for a number of different reasons. But you just take a look at the science and you can understand why we are concerned, that we're expecting sea level rise to increase by about 1.5 feet by the year 2050. And so that's something that we have to take into account. And in turn, that has huge impacts on a number of different areas. And so for those of you who are familiar with Virginia's Coastal Resilience Master Plan, one of the very stark items that pops out is that about 89% of our wetlands, tidal wetlands, are under threat of being inundated and gone. And likewise, it has a huge impact on our bay's iconic species. And it affects our species in way different ways. It's really interesting, right? And so crabs, striped bass, oysters, but it really gets to the importance of how do we manage this change and how do we manage this change effectively. And then there's new species that we're going to have to deal with as well. So at the same time as we're seeing impacts to our existing species, we're seeing stone crabs emerge in our area. Little did I ever think that Virginia could have a thriving shrimp fishery, and yet here we were 2 years ago passing legislation to do exactly that. So this year, Virginia has taken a number of different steps to tackle climate change head on. And so the first one, and this was an item that the governor focused on in her very, very first speech, to the General Assembly after she was sworn in, and that is Virginia rejoining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And so not only will that result in reducing greenhouse gases, but it will also generate $570 million per year, which by statute has to go back into climate resilience initiatives. And so one of the things as a planner that always makes me cringe is we pass all these great things and they sit on the shelf and we don't have money to implement them. And we have to have the political will to not only write the plans, we know what we need to do, but ultimately to be able to fund those initiatives. And that's what this initiative does. We passed legislation this year to require the beneficial use of dredge spoils, which can be a very, very useful tool with respect to wetland restoration and migration. We're completing phase 2 of our Coastal Resilience Master Plan, which will provide more robust tool to guide local and state resilience investments. And then finally, I want to go back to that small but mighty Virginia Office of Resilience and really lift them up in terms of some of the work that they've been doing. And one of the things that they are pushing towards deals with setting up a collaborative of our colleges and universities. I am really, really proud, and I'm not going to name names in terms of universities because it will get me in trouble as I look around the room, as I forget one, but I'm really, really proud that we have such amazing research universities here in the Commonwealth, and we're structured to have healthy competition amongst our universities. We don't have a state system. Each of our universities has a board of visitors, and they actually compete with one another, usually in friendly, helpful ways. But it also means that we need to be sensitive and cognizant that we work together. And so I'm really excited that our Virginia Office of Resilience has pulled together this group of major universities so that we can talk about what are our priorities, what is it that we are duplicating, what are the gaps, and then finally the most important one in my mind is how do we make that information useful for decision makers. And this is something that I can't tell you how important it is for me as a former elected official, for me as the Secretary of Natural Resources, is that the information has to be presented in a way that is meaningful and actionable. And that's what we ultimately need to make sure happens. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention another really great regional collaboration, which is the Chesapeake Bay Partnership. And so the Bay faces a lot of the same kind of issues that you all are dealing with. I know many of you wear multiple hats when it comes to ocean issues and coastal issues and the Chesapeake Bay. And so you're dealing with things like invasive species, you're dealing with continued population growth, climate change, limited resources. And like our coastal areas and our oceans, a lot of times, most of the times, the solutions aren't found in the water. The solutions are found in the landscapes. And I'm constantly reminded that it is the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, and it's that for a reason, which is that you restore and connect people to the bay by making sure that you are focusing in on the landscapes and the local streams that are important to that restoration process. So I wanted to end with this, with a really, really important question. How do we do all this while reducing the cost burden on our citizens? And so we know the importance of ocean management, but we also need to realize that all of these things are being discussed in the context of a national narrative. I wish we could lean in and just focus in on the policy and the science, and yet politics is a really important part of all of this. And so right now there is that national debate on affordability. And so one of the governor's very first actions when she first took office was to sign Executive Order Number 1, which directed all of our secretariats, including mine, to really look at how do we identify strategies, reduce costs, and streamline government. And what I can say, and I say this very sincerely, is that there's a number of things that we can and we should do within all of our agencies, but the number one thing, the most powerful thing that we can do, quite honestly, is regional coordination. It's how we learn from each other, it's how we build from others' work, it's how we ultimately deliver results for the people of our respective states. So let me just leave you with this, which is what you do is vitally important. Regional collaboration across states is the most effective way to tackle these complex issues. This is urgent work. People's lives and livelihoods are at stake. And then I am pleased to say on behalf of the governor, Virginia is 100% committed to the success of this partnership. So again, thank you, every one of you, for what you do, and I hope you have an impactful rest of your conference. So thank you so much.